Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt. I'm a psychic and soul mentor in the heart of New York City. And what we are looking at today on Venus Unplugged is the mysteries in Pompeii, and we're on the sixth scene. And what we do here in Venus Unplugged is we explore all things that have to do with Venus. The archetype, the beauty, the art, relationships, all things Venusian. And so this morning, I usually have 2 sleeps. Where most people, it's like they get the 8 hours. That's never worked for me. So I usually have a few hours, and then I wake up, and then I do some reading or research or whatever. And then I go back to sleep, and that's usually when I have my best sleep, the second sleep. And that kind of works for me. And because I always worried, like, why didn't I get that 8 hours of sleep until I realized it's because you don't want it. At any rate, so usually I fall back to sleep, but that didn't happen because I woke up from a dream, a vision, something was going on, but the words that were being said as I was waking was like genius is madness, and genius is madness done right, and it chooses you. Well, that's kind of got my interest, right? So I actually was so and am so filled with this, this Dionysian energy. It's like when you start reading about the gods and the goddesses, and you start working this, and the more it moves out of your head and into your being, into the body, is the more it kind of incarnates, right? Now, because I've been doing this since 1980, so that's a lot of exposure. But something must have caught me yesterday because I woke up with this energy, this Dionysian kind of force field. Now, of course, when I was young and naive, I would experience this as a depression or as a manic state. But now, having had enough initiations in my life and certainly enough working with enough people, I realized, no, these initiations, these gods, they just mug you whenever they feel like it. So, yes, logic and Apollo says, go back to sleep and get that extra or the second 4 hours so you can be bright and shiny and have a shiny intellect and speak from your head and all that kind of stuff. But today, that was not my truth. My soul said, get on this. It was like, really? Really? You think people want to really hear this at 6 o'clock in the morning? It was like, yes, they do. All right, so you'll be waiting for them. So you may be having your coffee right now, and here I am, okay? So what we're talking about is the sixth scene in the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii, right? And I think this week, I've been seeing it in the people that I've been working with and mentoring and friends' lives, that it seems as if I were bold enough to express this, it's as if this is a time where we're seeking permission to answer the summons of our soul or psyche. So what would be the summons of your soul? See, the ancestors knew that if we wait upon the darkness with enough humility and faithfulness and patience, it does grow luminous. If we listen to the silence, it speaks to us in time. But it's an intimacy And that intimacy we can experience a certain anguish in the body and in the soul. It's an angst, it's an intimacy, but it's also the presence of divinity. It's somewhere in the room where it's been activated. Now, when it's not going so cool, we just feel nuts. But when we start to feel this energy moving through us, this Dionysian force, this god of madness, okay, in a very interesting book called Pagan Grace by Jeanette Paris, she talks about soul making through the body. And this is what these mysteries are about. And that the name Baccharis for Dionysus is to act like a baccarat, that is to become agitated, to cry out, to fall into trance, to act crazily. Sounds like my family. Okay. The ancient Greeks had a more extensive vocabulary than we do to describe trance and excitement. And translators, from the Greek and from the Roman, okay, they're finding trouble with words to describe this frenetic madness without falling into a vocabulary pathology, which is also another difficulty. I mean, the limitations of our modern language. It's difficult. That's why it's always good to have a dictionary of etymology when we think we're using a word properly and we're not. It's so much deeper or broader or more wild than we could ever imagine. And that's what happens with this word, bakant, right? But if the scholars had tended to the pathology, too early in the morning, pathology of the Dionysians, it's just because they lacked the words. It's because we've lost connection to the archetypal with it, the chance to let off steam without risking degradation as pathological freaks. Interesting, right? The translators couldn't find words because they saw hysteria in Dionysus rather than recognizing Dionysus in hysteria. So in these mysteries of Pompeii, of course, the sixth stage, which is what we're looking at, is when we begin to realize, or the initiate begins to recognize, it's like, holy moly, they just went through, the last one was the hysteria stuff and the angel coming down upon them and the transformation, okay? So, and each of these interpretations suggests that there's been a turn to a greater seriousness at this point of the initiation. And at this point of the initiation, as the initiate anticipates the journey into the underworld. Remember, Persephone, the underworld? So in scene 3, preceding the fright of the initiate, was like a light, a pleasant dreaming, and a setting of nature. The fifth scene, which we did last week, the fifth scene suggests impending intoxication, an encounter with the god of Dionysus. That wild child. And in both scenes, Sylnius appears to represent a loosening of the conscious control. In the first scene, there is a substitution for only partly human beings for humans. In the fifth scene, fully human beings are again not represented, but neither are fully animals, nor the first, for the only time female figures are completely absent. So at this point, the initiate must make a weighty decision. Now, if you're scared to death, are you really making decisions, or are you just going on instinct? Because this is an accelerated, here you're on the dock, and of course these gorgeous images, and what do they mean, and yet this is by choice. You're not forced into the Villa of Mysteries. You have an intention, but even that anticipatory anxiety at this point bites the dust, because game is on, man. This is serious. The only way to heaven is through the gates of hell, and that's where you're going to be going, whatever hell may be. So at this point, the initiate must make a weighted decision. Okay? Is she going to submit to the loss of conscious control, or is she going to run away frightened and break off the initiation? That's a tough one. We've all been in that place. Oh, do I really? You ever get that? It's like psyche is about ready to ask a question, and you're thinking, la-di-da-di-da-di, gee, why don't I just scrub the floors? Or, hey, I'll do a load of wash. Or, hey, I'll just get in some neurotic ranting because I don't want to face. Because once the question is asked of your soul, where are you going to go? Except purposely wound your soul, which I don't think is so cool, because the soul knows it has eternity. All right. So, will you submit to loss of conscious control, surrender, or is she going to run away frightened? At such a moment of decision may be familiar, and you can recall at points when you first got a glimpse of the collective unconscious and became frightened and were tempted to break off relatedness, or when we get an insight into a parent who's preparing for their death, or any person preparing for their death, and we get an insight. Oh, wow, man. All bets are off. This stuff is real. We come out of a realm that we call death, and then we're born, and then we're going back, and you realize, uh-oh, I'm really in an initiation. And if we could breathe and surrender to the kind of creative chaos that's going to happen, it's going to happen anyway, you're going to get an insight. By running, you're just going to, next person that you meet, you're going to tell your neurotic story that really doesn't have much to it except that you're hysterical, and instead of being in relationship with Dionysus, you're experiencing hysteria, instead of saying, wow, when I feel this hysteria, where is Dionysus in me now? What does it want? It wanted me to get up and talk at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's not my gig, but it was obviously Dionysus, and I've learned to shut up and listen to the gods. They're going to have their way anyway. So in this sixth scene, it's identified, and it's not considered a stage in the initiation sequence. It's an overall theme picture of Dionysus and Ariadne. This is where one sandal has fallen off. As we see the center foreground, it indicates that he goes not only to the outer world, but also to the netherworld, to which the initiate has to withdraw and continue her initiation. Dun, 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 dun. This is the only area in the series which has suffered, they're talking about the physical, which has suffered material damage. Yet one can see and discern the form of Dionysus laid back on Ariadne. Next to that, he's leaning on her, not she on him. This reversal must have a significant meaning in the particular initiation rite, the elevation of the goddess above the god, and his dependency on her. So this is a very interesting image. This is a switch. Above becomes below. Introvert becomes extrovert. This is what is always happening in the psyche. Always. And if we could stop just for a second and say, wow, I tapped into an aspect of an initiation. I don't know. I need to surrender. The ego or Apollo, the bright, shiny mind, wants to take over everything, and it can't. So these women went into these initiation rites so that they could learn to do this, to drop deeper and deeper, bone by bone, as it were, into that unknown, this cosmology of psyche and soul. A lot of times people, it's in the images, people think, well, the unconscious, and think it's like a little section, in the middle of their stomach or something. No, we are ensouled. We have a psyche, we have a soul, but we are ensouled. The whole cosmos is ensouled, okay? So that's what these initiations are about, and that's what the sixth scene is about. And we begin to realize the muse cannot be willed, only welcomed. And same is true. Well, the frightening thing about Dionysus is he just shows up anywhere at the most inconvenient moments. And there he is. But it is this initiation. And in this particular image of Dionysus and Ariadne, it's what happens within of the masculine and the feminine within. And the power of what takes place in these initiations. So here in the sixth scene, all right, it's the initiation chamber. So just imagine that you're in this initiation chamber, or you can go on Pinterest and pick up a bunch of images and put them together of the scene, okay? Or like I did, I copied them out and put them in like a shoebox so that it looks like a little room. Remember, we used to make those things when we were kids, okay? And so I can look into that and see like, oh, that's what that looks like on the wall. I believe in giving a lot of libido, meaning, whatever is the imagination, giving it some type of form, blowing it into, very, very important to act it out or dance it out, or that's blowing libido, that's blowing life into something, it's like a little golden thread, or it's an idea, and let's breathe into that. And then what does it say? What does that become? You see it morph. That's how we work with these mysteries in everyday life. So, although part of this of the wall is damaged, we do see Ariadne enthroned and elevated as Persephone. Now, for those of you that remember your Greek mythology, Persephone is the one who went into the underworld. She was abducted at 7 into the underworld, and she was in there for 6 months, and she did not come out as a 7.5-year-old. She came out as queen of the underworld. So she must have been learning something while she was in there. And so the Persephone aspect of the feminine is the mystery. She's virginal, which means she's not affected. The virginal part of us is the one who's whole. We're whole within ourselves. Once again, we don't understand words, the power of the words. So here, Ariadne is enthroned and elevated as Persephone, queen of the underworld. And when you encounter the queen of the underworld, there's great healing that is about to take place. And we are looking at this choice. It's kind of like being in a forest. Or like I associate it with Dante. When he begins his journey, loses his way, and then, there's something magnificent about, like, wow, naming it. I've lost my way. So whatever the ego is yak in a story it's telling you, it's like, no, man, shut up. I am lost. Be still. Observe what that surrender is about. Because what will happen, you will find other sources of information, other guiding forces in your life. Let the old one goes. Don't hold on to that. Surrender. Psyche will never, ever bring you to another level of awareness without a solid foundation. Solid foundation is created in the invisible, and then we get the insight, and then with the insight, there's going to be a sacrifice. There needs to be, because we can't hold an old truth to a new awakening. This is all, simply put, this is all about learning how to mature, which is not a big goal in the modern world, which is surprising to me. I've seen thousands of people, that is eventually what it is that they want, and they realize, but then their presenting issue is never, I want to mature. And it needs to be stated. Sometimes it's stated in wanting wisdom, which would be maturity. But, if we got a little closer to being human and just say, man, or how many times have you wanted to say to somebody, they're giving you this big complex story, right? And all you want to say is like, whoa, grow up. This is not acceptable. And people get offended when you say grow up. Because you don't want to listen to a 14-year-old hysteria as if it has great wisdom. No, man, you're possessed. And this Dionysian energy when that starts moving through our life, okay? So what begins to happen at this point, okay, it's the disappearance, and then the disappearance of the order of things. It's suddenly, it's upon you. And how many times we'll plan something, or we'll bargain for time and say, oh, that seems far away, and suddenly the day or the moment is like, holy moly, shut the front door, because the time is now. And if you're fortunate and can take one eye and look within while the other eye looks without, you will realize that your psyche has been preparing you all along. Your ego will not have the answer or the right solution, but psyche does. Turn towards the unknown. Go deeper in the not knowing. Because it can never not be nothing. There's always something. You may not like the form it comes in, or you may not understand, but be patient. It's all shifting. So this is what begins to happen in the depths of the underworld. And there's a dramatic action many of the ancient mystery cults. It evokes every level from the greatest fear. So for the Orphic cult, the Dionysian, there was a, I'm probably not saying it right, KATABASIS, well, I'm not up on my Greek, was the pattern of the path which the initiated had to take again after the death of the body. They learned to know this path during their lives through the symbolic action of the cult, so that after their departure, they could surely find it and know for the certain ways to the Lord, who invites all mankind to himself in some way, which will be within reach of their souls. So for the Orphics, the underworld was always the goal of the soul. Their visions found blessedness in those green meadows near the waters of life and in the divine twilight. And the underground sun of Dionysus was united with the moon of Ariadne. I mean, doesn't that just make you swoon? So the part of these initiations were to learn this pattern. In some ways, I guess it would be similar to the Kabbalah, where you're learning the patterns on the tree of life. There's actually 4 trees of life, and when you learn to walk them, you pretty much can relate to all sorts of levels of magic and consciousness. So these initiation rites were preparing, like the labyrinth, like Ariadne in the labyrinth, for the journey through the threshold of life into the cosmos. Now, the threshold is just called death. There's no death. Just look at the heavens. See it moving. Everything's moving and alive in one form or another. So it's preparing people to walk this. So it's kind of like a practice run for moving beyond this life. And it's in the deepest place. So the underworld was always the goal of the soul. Their vision found blessedness in understanding these patterns, okay? And it was in the mystery cults, it was the moment when they reached the deepest place on their way of the initiation, which also was the turning point from whence a new ascent was possible. I know this particular feeling, and it wasn't from Pompeii. It was one of my near-death experiences where I was moving towards that great journey in the cosmos, and suddenly there was this turning point, and I had to return to the earth. I was given a scroll and had to return to the earth. So I know this feeling, okay? And what we can all say about this moment in the turning point, okay? This is the only point that is confirmed through the representation of the frescoes that follow. So we're going to go on to the 7th fresco. So there you have it. Your turning point, if you're feeling hysterical about anything, that's the presence of Dionysus. Don't get tricked. This is the God of pure delight and wildness. And if we don't honor it and go with it, we're just going to get neurotic. We don't need that. We want the high adventure, even if we're terrified. So what? At least it's the right use of fear rather than just being paralyzed. So till next week, we will continue with these incredible mysteries and this incredible journey that we're all experiencing, that we know it or not. So give yourself permission to live according to your soul, and you'll be amazed what goes on. Okay, till next week. I'm going to put this up on Facebook, and let the world know about it. And it's also will be on iTunes, la-di-da, all that stuff. Okay, happy trails. Bye-bye.
Napa know-how.
The Napa guy knows not to judge a man by his car's multicolored paint job or absence of modern gadgetry. Who cares if it's technically old enough to vote and the windows are powered by the strength of your left arm? Your monthly payment is zero, and it'll stay that way. Because with over 500,000 parts and a little Napa know-how, you can keep anything on the road. She may not be pretty, but she's all yours. That's Napa know-how.
Napa know-how.
They're gonna kill the love of my life.
Casey!
If I don't go back to what I was doing.
Our line of work is quite brutal and quite ruthless.
How far would you go for love?
You steal truck, bring it to me. Then you make your money.
Is it dangerous?
Of course it's dangerous!
Nicholas Hoult, Felicity Jones, with Ben Kingsley and Anthony Hopkins.
All this trouble, all this pain, for love.
Collide, now playing. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Appropriate for children under 13. Appropriate for children under 13. Appropriate for children under 13.